Welcome to yet another edition of Top Shot, in which we interview a very distinguished personality who talk to us on various issues concerning you and me, the issues which are really relevant to your life, my life, and the lives of many people. Today we have a very distinguished person in Dr. Suman Sahai, a person who has been fighting for a cause. Welcome to this program, Dr. Suman Sahai. In fact, whenever I met you, I've always been wondering how you can keep your tempo of fighting for a cause all these years without a break. Why? How do you manage to do that?
Because it's not just me who's doing that. There's a whole team of people. There are lots of well-wishers and supporters. A lot of people feel for these causes, and it's a collective energy that keeps us all going.
So what do you really think is the most important issue now for the country?
I think the most important issue now for the country is food.
Okay.
Food and agriculture sustainability, because both are under very big threat. Internationally, there's a crisis on food, and nationally, there's a crisis on food. If you see what is happening internationally, all the global food stocks are declining. If you see the wheat stocks, they're almost half. Wheat is normally kept at about 190 metric tons. It's now almost 100 metric tons. Rice is kept at about something similar, about 90 metric tons, almost half that. So global food stocks are at an all-time low. This should be a lesson for our policymakers and politicians who think that if you don't produce at home, you can import the food. There is nothing now left to import. And we must understand why this is happening, to understand how serious it is. The 2 or 3 reasons why this is happening, why there's an international shortage, is number one, the big countries that are exporters, like the United States, like China, United States for wheat, China for corn, soybean. These countries have stopped export. The reason they have stopped export is because in the case of China, there is a food inflation, and they have put a cap on exports so that they can ensure large domestic supplies of food to fight that inflation. In the case of the US, there is this completely madcap policy. You can call it nothing except a crazy madcap policy on biofuels, agrofuels. So this huge corn belt of Ohio, this huge Iowa corn belt.
Midwest of US.
Correct. What has happened to that? This corn is now being diverted to making biofuels, to making ethanol in a crazy energy policy. It's not going to do anything for the energy policy, but it will certainly take away the food basis. Number 2, what is the second threat to corn, is the genetically engineering foods industry. The Iowa corn, the market prices had slumped. So both biofuels and what are called biopharma plants, that means producing industrial molecules through genetic engineering in corn plants, is an effort to raise the corn prices for the corn farmer. All the Iowa senators have gone to the political beachheads for this, to fight for this. The net result of both these policies is no corn for food. When there is no corn for food, the entire animal feeding is threatened. So Europe does not have now adequate corn. They're diverting wheat for animal feeding. Now this nexus, corn going into biofuel and going into biopharma, genetically engineered products, wheat being diverted into animal feed, has brought a huge crash in the availability of global food stocks. So this must be very clearly understood, that if we don't produce our own wheat and if we don't produce our own food grains, there is not a lot out there in the international market to buy. The other thing we must also keep in mind when we're making these export and import policies, never mind if we have a shortfall, this disgraceful wheat import that we've had. When you import wheat, and this has been known from the old PL 480 days and after that, the pre-Green Revolution days and even the times in between. When India records its interest in buying any grain, the prices double.
Yeah.
So the moment India says it's on the market, all the grain people, Cargill and Archer Daniel Midlands, for them it's like, big bucks earning time. Because India doesn't buy 5 million tons. India buys megatons of food. And global prices of that commodity will double immediately. So we end up buying very expensive food. So to recap, firstly, if we buy food, it's very expensive food and probably there isn't enough food. Which brings us to the question of what do we do? Because domestically, we are facing what is now being called the agrarian crisis. But the agrarian crisis in actual terms means that our agriculture productivity is at an all-time low. The reason it is at an all-time low is because we are not putting enough investment in agriculture. The farmer is indebted and therefore has not been able to go back to agriculture at a top level, and because the economics of agriculture have turned very adverse. We have been conducting surveys, Gene Campaign has been conducting surveys, lots of institutions have conducted surveys to find out what is the root of the agrarian crisis, and everybody has come up with one answer: indebtedness. The indebtedness is a straightforward economic formula. The input costs of agriculture are very high and the market price is simply not keeping pace. I don't know what is wrong with successive governments that when it comes to fixing the minimum support price, it is 10 rupees per quintal increased, 15 rupees a quintal increase. Input costs have gone up by 200%. Now, is a farmer crazy? It's just because that a farmer has no options but to till the land that today we continue to produce some food. You will also recall that the National Sample Survey, when the data came, almost half the farmers in this country do not want to continue farming and certainly do not want their children to go into farming. Farmers, we work in many, many rural areas, Jharkhand, Uttaranchal, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. The people that we are in touch with say very openly, I want my son to go to the city and ply a rickshaw, because they don't feel very hopeful about getting jobs. Let him ply a rickshaw, let him work in the sabzi mandi, let him do labor in the construction labor, but let him not till the land because he will die.
So we have as you said, the biggest challenge now for us is food-related issues, because if you don't eat, how will you survive?
Absolutely.
And I think it's a matter of survival for millions of people, and particularly in India, because we have at least 1/4 of a population which lives below poverty line.
Absolutely.
And for them, they probably would really look forward only to have something to eat.
Correct.
If not 3 meals, at least 1 meal. Right. And if that is not available, what's going to happen? So that's a very major crisis. You said very interesting that we always felt that now we have $300 billion of foreign exchange reserves, and therefore we don't have to worry, we can import anything. But if it is not available, then how will you import it?
Correct.
Now, is the other dimension of the crisis, one you said is from the supply side, why supply is going down. But on the demand side, is it because the world economy grew at record rates for the last few years, therefore more people have got more money in the pocket, so they would like to spend more on food? Is this also the reason that maybe the richest of the world is also causing this crisis?
Sure. I mean, we have that famous statistics of 80-20. 20% of the world population is eating up 80% of its resources. I mean, there's that famous statistic. Yeah. But another thing that is happening is population growth. I mean, it's a very unpopular subject to talk about. The fact is that there are many more people today to feed than the capacity to feed them. So there is that mismatch. And somewhere or the other, I think globally we have to look at the fact that there is a growing population. I do believe it is still possible to feed this population. Not in the way we are going about it currently, but we do not have to look at a Malthusian situation of doom. We still have the capacity to feed the people. But I think that we need to be extremely careful about what strategies we are proposing. Vegetarianism is a much more, I'm not telling people what to eat and what not to eat, but the more that you divert grains into livestock keeping for meat, the more shortfall there is for food production. India has this wonderful state of being largely a vegetarian country. So our food policies can be much better managed than this extremely unnatural rearing pigs and cows for meat on wheat, which is not available for human food. The other thing that we need to look at in our country is that, we don't talk about whether food scarcity is the result of increasing affluence. That may be happening at a global level where food is being diverted.
Yes, yet to see the affluence really.
We have still got, I think 30% of our people living on 20 rupees a day. Shameful, absolutely shameful. I think where every Indian has to hang his and her head in shame is the case of farmer suicide. If one farmer in this country kills himself, then it is something that is a national shame. So what are we doing to secure our food production? What are we doing to secure our agriculture production? That must be the focus of Indian policy and attention.
But no, when you talk about that in Indian context now, because one, we have seen the limitation of this theory that if you don't have it, don't make it, buy it, make or buy theory. In which if you don't make it in India, you can import it from outside India. The limitation is very well brought out.
You export orchids and you buy wheat and squeeze stuff like that.
It's not just going to work because it's not just available. You may have money, but you don't have the food stock available. Now, looking at from Indian context, the problem with Indian policymakers is that we again don't take that holistic view. Like what the world is reacting now, they want to address a climate change problem, and in the process they are trying to create not addressing the climate change problem in any case, but creating a food problem. Now, in Indian context, the same thing happens because we have now just about 2.2% of the land, and we need to feed about 16-17% of global population. The problem is, how do you make sure that the land which is required for agriculture is maintained for agriculture? The land which is required for industrialization is not diverted from agriculture but used in other way, and then forests which are required to maintain the ecological balance also is maintained. So do you think this crisis in agriculture is also related to the land use pattern issues?
Without a doubt. I mean, you've put your finger on one of the most contemporarily, the most difficult situation we are facing with the SEZs. There were several decisions taken that diversion of 2 crop areas, I mean land where you can cultivate 2 crops, cannot be diverted to SEZs. But it's happening. So why is it happening? And that's what I mean, the bankruptcy of the policymaker, the bankruptcy, and pardon me for saying that to you, of the political leadership in this country. It is running with the hare and hunting with the hound. It is saying one thing somewhere and doing something somewhere else. Land use is quite rightly, as you said, the crux of the issue. Land use for agriculture, yes, we need industry also, but demarcate those areas that are appropriate for industry, which are not appropriate for agriculture. Give industry, because to set up a factory, you don't need fertile soil. But to cultivate a crop, you need fertile soil. So I think that there should not be a conflict of interest. The conflict of interest arises when industry and many other sections of real estate developers are getting into SEZs as cornering the real estate. And I think there a very well-defined and criminally executed policy. No diversion of arable farmland to SEZs. That's one thing that we need. The other thing that we need to look at is that when we do have the farmlands, how do we deal with it? How do we increase productivity? Because that is the crux. Yeah. If farmers don't want to produce food, you're in really bad trouble. Because you and I don't produce food, farmers do. So how do you enable them to produce food? And I think, as I said earlier, I think it's very doable. I don't think this country should at all feel that it does not have a way. It has many ways if we can only get our heads straight on making agriculture the priority of this country. Because let's not fool ourselves. It is the priority. If you see what is happening to the arable land, India's arable land is irrigated only up to 30%. Yeah. So 70% of the land on which you cultivate crops is giving you only 1 crop. Yeah. It's a very simple equation. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out. If you do rainwater harvesting, if you create farm ponds, if you clean up your water tanks, if you create check dams, if you do just this one exercise, you will enable a second crop. 70% of India, which gives you only 1 crop, tomorrow if it starts giving you 2 crops, can you imagine the jump, the absolute jump in the food production in this country? So it is not a situation without hope.
So one is, of course, you can't do agriculture, as I always believe, is without land, because nobody has developed the technology to do agriculture
hydroponics,
in air. Right. So it's not possible. And the other one is without water. You can use less water, but not without water.
Right.
So again, like land, which is a limitation of just 2.2%, water is again just 4% of the world, and that again we need to use it. You raise an issue of considering water as one of the key component of these agriculture-related policies. If we have got about only 200 cubic meters per capita storage capacity as opposed to 5,000 cubic meters in the United States. So how do you actually increase the storage capacity? Because
what am I to tell you about water? You used to be the water minister in this country,
in
so
my
you
opinion,
know.
I very strongly feel that we really need to look at water as a major intervention in water. But you are right. So agriculture cannot be done without water and land. That's the co-impet. You always, I've seen you running an organization and Gene Campaign. Is that the organization that is called?
Correct.
And in fact, I was all the time thinking that why you call it Gene Campaign? Why? What is the reason why you call it Gene Campaign?
Good question. In fact, when we kept this name way back in 1993, everybody said, "My God, what a strange name! Why don't you call it some Abhiyan?" And Gene Campaign was a difficult name. The reason we kept it, we chose that name, was because I think that we recognized that the long-term battle for us in the world, and very much for us in the southern countries, was going to be the battle for the control of genes, for the control of genetic resources. Because ever since biotechnology became such a powerful economic sector, and at one time it was being estimated that of the global economy, about 70% would be generated from biotechnology. Biotechnology in mining, biotechnology in feedstock chemical, biotechnology in environmental remediation, biotechnology in agriculture, biotechnology in medicines, biotechnology in the drug and chemical sector. So biotechnology became a very, very dominating technological sector. The fact also that the global economy is becoming a knowledge economy. You know, it's not just about tea export and silk import and how much leather and how many garments. It's a technology-driven knowledge economy. And biotechnology, information technology, these are the drivers now of the global economy. Information technology, we have found our place and we will undoubtedly grow. We have this innate genius for mathematics, which helps in the software. In the biotechnology sector, which was always neglected in comparison to the infotech sector, the battle is about genes, because biotechnology as a technology to create products needs genetic resources, needs genetic material to make products using biotechnology. And the strange thing in the world is that you have a very clear divide between countries that have the technology, the United States, Japan, to some extent Europe, and the countries that have the raw material. So the people who have the technology don't have the genes, and the people who have the genes usually don't have the technology. India is a strange mixture of the two. We are sitting on large amounts of genetic resources. We also have laboratories that can do genetic engineering. I'm not now debating the merits and demerits of this technology, but the fact is that in the global projection of this technology, the countries that have the technology and that desperately need biotechnology for their own economies need to access genetic resources. And that is why this whole biotechnology sector came under patents in the Uruguay round. So we realized the battle was for genes, and that is why the campaign to protect the genes was the Gene Campaign.
Okay. We'll come back to this program and we'll just, don't go away, we'll take a short break. We are talking to Dr. Suman Sahai about various issues related to food security, and now she was just talking to us about genes, and we'll come back to it very soon. Don't go away. I'm Suresh Prabhu, waiting for you to come back. Welcome back to Top Shot, in which we are talking to Dr. Suman Sahai, a founder of an organization called Gene Campaign, campaigning for various issues including food security, livelihood, farmer rights and whatnot. Dr. Suman Sahai, you are talking to me about why you named your organization Gene Campaign, and you were trying to tell me the relevance of genes and why you really decided to campaign. I was thinking to myself, whenever I come to your programs and talk to you and seen what you're doing, I think in your campaigning is in your genes. Is it true?
Perhaps. I have a rural origin, I come from a family that has inculcated a tremendous sense of public interest. So I guess we grew up thinking that it's not only about yourself, it's about other people as well. So we're fighters.
So you actually chose a life not to just look after your own interest, but to look after the interest of millions of other people. So I think you are studying somewhere, you're teaching somewhere outside India and you decided to come back. Is it true?
Right. I have a training in genetics. I have a PhD in genetics and I became a professor in genetics. And I have been at the university in Chicago and then at the university in Heidelberg. My actual academic career was in Germany, yes, at the University of Heidelberg. But many things happened. As a scientist, I was familiar with science and biology and genetics, and our laboratories were dealing with genetic material. So when this Uruguay round started, if you remember, there was a so-called Dunkel draft. That Dunkel draft, which was the ultimate draft, the Dunkel draft contained features which were not being paid attention to. You will also recall, because you were active at that time, that when the Dunkel draft and the intellectual property debate was going on, the whole focus was on the drug sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and a lot of people from Bombay were fighting this, that there should not be product patents. Everybody at that time was focused here. And then Gene Campaign said, that is a fight, but what will happen to agriculture because of the conditions of the Dunkel draft and the GATT will be suicidal for this country. Because Article 27(3)(b, which became then the most quoted article, wanted to have patents on seeds. And the Indian government at that time was contemplating patents on seeds. Partly because I am a geneticist, that I could see what the strange reading of that clause, what that meant.
Seeds of disaster, you could see.
Seeds of disaster, if you want to call it that. And partly because of my own rural background, a kind of affinity and understanding, intuitive understanding of agriculture, made me understand and made me realize, I can remember these things leaping out of the page, that this is going to kill Indian agriculture. And that is why Gene Campaign then started this whole campaign that stop and think what will happen if you accept these clauses. And I think that this very long and sustained campaign, and I remember one of our partners who was a coordinator of Gene Campaign at that time, a man called Mohan Prakash, whom I wish to pay tribute to, who really took Gene Campaign into the fields, into people. We went and talked to everybody in 17 states and raised this campaign, saying only one thing: if you have patents on seeds, you will lose control on seed. If the farmer loses control on seed, agriculture is finished. I want to recall here a confusion that a lot of people are under, that the Green Revolution and this so-called Gene Revolution is the same. One thing that one must remember about the Green Revolution, whatever its other drawbacks might have been, the fact was that this technological revolution of the Green Revolution was a public sector revolution. The seed was never owned by anybody. The seed was owned by the farmer. When research institutions had developed a high-yielding variety, the farmer had complete control.
Not covered by the
It
intellectual
was
property rights.
never under anyone's control. It was the people's seed, the farmer's seed. And that was a very important difference to what they're trying to do today. So I think that if you look at what happened in agriculture, then we need to draw lessons and understand how the WTO and the so-called TRIPS chapter on intellectual property rights would have finished off Indian agriculture. And that was the intention. The 27(3)(b and the demand to patent patent seeds at that time, was again the effort of the biotechnology industry to gain control of genetic material, to gain control of Indian genetic material, to create seeds by biotechnology or genetic engineering. That was the tussle. That is why Gene Campaign.
But tell me, how important it is, you said that once the farmers lose control on seeds, then he in fact is totally now enslaved to somebody who actually holds it. Can you explain that, how does it happen?
How it happens is like this. Today, even today, who produces seed? Today, India is using something like 65 lakh tons of seed annually for its seed requirements for both crops. 65 lakh ton seeds is produced in this country for use by farmers. Who produces that? It's not a company. It is not the national seeds corporations. It is not the state seeds corporations. It is the farming community. People must understand and recognize that India's largest seed producer is the farming community. And even the National Seeds Corporation will tell you that India's seeds are produced by India's farmers. So, we have this tradition of farmers saving their own seed for the next crop, and that is why hybrids are a bad idea. We also have a tradition, which I think a lot of people don't know, of farmers creating new varieties. In fact, in vegetables, in castor, in groundnut, in cotton, in many, many crops, farmers have created superb varieties.
That's agrobiodiversity actually.
That is agrobiodiversity. That is also farmers' skill and science.
That's right.
Let us not fool ourselves that science is only done by people who wear long white coats. I'm one of those who's worn long white coats. But it needs to be understood that there is a science happening in the field as well. Farmers also do science. They also produce extraordinarily successful varieties. I'll remind you, not so many years ago, but 5-6 years ago in Saurashtra, a farmer created a groundnut variety with 3 grains per pod, huge ones. It's a farmer variety. The most successful castor variety in this country is a farmer variety. Bikaneri Nirma 1, one of the most famous and successful cotton varieties, is a farmer variety. These were not created by scientists. So, if we leave it to farmers and give them technological and market support, seed production will continue. We don't need companies.
So actually, you're alarmed by the fact that probably if the TIPS, the trade-related information, intellectual property right come into play, then probably the farmers would lose this right of doing this?
Oh, but today we have gotten rid of that. I mean, if there is...
At that particular time, we are worried about that.
But we now have rejected. I mean, at that time we rejected seed patents. This country has given itself a law called the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act. And I wish to say also that Gene Campaign has played a very central role in campaigning for this legislation and actually getting a farmers' rights legislation in this country. And it would also be appropriate to say that the only country that has a farmers' rights legislation, the only country in the world is India. There's no other country that has given legal rights to its farmers.
You know, so actually, in a way, you succeeded in making sure that the farmers don't lose what they have and their future is not mortgaged to somebody who is not actually responsible for that. So you succeeded in that. Now, you know, we still have a crisis in agriculture. And in fact, the government recently announced a debt waiver of about 60,000 crores.
Yes.
Because you said earlier that the problem with the farming is that the input costs are much higher than the realization from the farming produce that farmer gets from the market. So it's always you invest more and you get less. So you keep adding to debt because 100 rupees you invest, 80 rupees you get, 20 rupee debt, another year another debt. So debt relief was something which was to address this problem. Do you think it was an adequate response to the farm crisis in India today?
I think it's a very important first step. And I am appalled at the reaction to the debt waiver. You have seen, you also read the same newspapers, you have seen prophets of doom saying that, oh my God, India is going to suffer a massive setback because of 60,000 crores being dumped into the farm. I mean, I really beg you. Nobody has a thing to say when successive pay commissions give money. Nobody has anything to say when industry, bad debts of the industry are routinely written off. Nobody has anything to say when the life insurance corporation, etc. Only when you spend this much money on farmers, all hell breaks loose. So that attitude is one of our major problems. The farm sector is so avoidable in the eyes of the urban middle class. That has to change. I think the farm loan waiver is the least that the government can do, because it must be understood that the farm crisis is not something that farmers have made. The farm crisis is the result of exploitative, unfair government policies made by successive governments, both by the bureaucrats and the political leaders who have been insensitive to the point of being criminal. That has created the farm crisis. Other people have created their own mess. Industry creates its own mess, UTI created its own mess, LIC created its own mess. The farm crisis was created not by farmers but by government policy. Now, for heaven's sake, have some sense of shame and try to help this sector to get out. Yeah. And this 60,000 loan waiver is not such a huge amount of money.
Yeah. Now, one is debt waiver itself now, we talk about, and you welcome the measure in terms of policy initiative. But then if it is a really initiative to actually address the debt problem of the farmers, then you must solve it in totality. Otherwise,
Totally.
it will not help. For example, more than 52% of farmers, as per the government's own statistics, do not